I'll second.
All right. So Mary makes a motion and Catherine is the second.
Yes.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I don't see any opposed. All right, so the February minutes pass. And Phyllis, did you want to speak first about the information items or anything that you wanted to highlight or have clarity for us about? And then if anyone has questions, we'll go through those.
Okay, certainly. So the first thing I'll do is say I apologize for my typo that I did not catch, and that's in the administration news. That's supposed to be effective April 1. So I did want to talk a little bit more about that to give some background. So before the Housing Choice Voucher Program came into DSS, there used to be a separate Albemarle County Office of Housing, and there was a chief of that department. And his role was to oversee the Housing Choice Voucher Program, but he was also very much involved in getting community development block grant funding to assist in various affordable housing initiatives throughout the county. And then he also was in charge of overseeing the housing policy in the county. When the office was dismantled, the Housing Choice Voucher element part came into DSS, and then the planner grant function went into community development. And over the last few months, it's become clear that it would make more sense for all of the housing functions to be kind of together, as well as the fact that once Stacy finished her proposed housing policy and it's at the Board of Supervisors level to be approved, she moves into implementation of that policy, which really isn't a usual function of the community development department. They're more planners, they're not implementers. I'll use the words of the CDD director. So in any event, we recommended that this position come into DSS, and then Philip and Stacy, who are kind of at the same level, they'll manage both the housing program and then the housing policy. And given its high visibility nature of the position and its frequent interaction with the Board of Supervisors, we agreed that those two positions would report directly to the director, i.e. me. And so I also want to remind you that back in September, both Stacy and Philip presented to the advisory board. And so if you still have that PowerPoint presentation, it will give you more details about what each is in charge of and what they'll be working on. And Stacy in particular went through some of the elements of the proposed policy. So I did want to give a little bit more background about that. And then fingers crossed, the funding for the in-home services worker positions is still in the state budget. And the county has indicated that if the state passes that and it's included, that we will be able to use that funding to add positions to our family preservation team. And so I will be glad to answer any other questions that you all might have of the informational items.
I have a question. Are there other social services that have that component?
Well, we're all required to have child protective service, ongoing child protective services service. The in-home is the new name for ongoing child protective services.
Okay.
And so I would suggest that we have a much more robust ongoing child protective services, court-ordered foster care prevention programs than other localities have. And we have actually a dedicated unit In some departments, the Child Protective Services unit does both the investigations and the ongoing work. We have a separate unit that focuses on the prevention work. And so that's the unit that would get these new positions. And the more we can work with families, you know, after an investigation or through a court-ordered foster care prevention case, the better or more likely we're able to prevent them coming into care.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I've got the informational items on my screen, so I can't see everybody. So if you're raising your hand, let me know, or just unmute.
I have a more general question. I missed the presentation in September, so maybe this was covered, and if so, I apologize, but it's about housing planning. Because I noticed that it was referred to as, I guess, there's a housing planning position or a housing
policy manager.
Housing policy manager. Because we know that there is such a need for affordable housing in this area, and that is something that just directly affects the citizens of the county and the people served by the department in particular. You know, something that was in the news recently and is fresh on my mind is this proposed construction that was up near Forest Lakes, and how it was going to be a certain percentage of it was going to be designated as affordable housing, which affordable for some, but not for others. And it was really, you know, vigorously fought by a lot of the residents who live up in that area for a lot of different reasons. But I'm just wondering if we as a county, or if you as a department ever make a statement to whether it's the Planning Commission or whether it's the Board of Supervisors in support of developments like that we can see would have a potential positive impact on the needs of our residents, or is that something that we have to stay out of for different reasons?
You want me to answer that one, Phyllis?
Yes, please.
Okay. The housing policy position that's recently been kind of changed was the housing planner, right? So it's moving from community development into back into social services, really from whence it came. Although there really wasn't a planner aspect to it until we hired Stacy. Stacy's work has been to develop the housing policy that the board will consider, hopefully for adoption at its next meeting. The policy document then gives all county staff and the board and the Planning Commission, I get a better framework with which to then evaluate these proposals as they come forward. So it puts us in a better position to say this does or doesn't advance our policy goals from an affordable housing standpoint. So we've been pretty reluctant to go too far absent having that adopted, because it really there's an agency that really comes with having the board put their stamp on it and say, yes, this is our policy. Until then, we're a little not well grounded. So it will help us all to better articulate what our position is. I say that first with some enthusiasm, but also to acknowledge that oftentimes that, you know, there are land use issues that have to be considered too. And Jenny is right in the middle of this, like all the time. And, you know, where our economic development office, for example, gets called in to take a position on, let's say, a cell tower. Well, you know, all cell towers, or public safety, that's probably a better example, right? Our police chief, well, won't you take a position to support this cell tower? Well, all cell towers to some degree will improve access to, to 911. But that's not the issue that's on the table. The issue that's on the table is this the right location? Is this the right height? Does this address other policy issues? And so I think I say that just in a fullness of explanation. I think that the policy document will really help us a lot, but it's still going to be, have this friction from a land use perspective and the role that the Planning Commission plays and the board plays about, is this the right scale, the right density, the right location, the right access to transit and that sort of thing. So more of an answer than you probably wanted, Mary, but it's a great question. And yes, and.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm trying to further my own understanding because it's so complicated. And I think that the majority of the people in the county don't understand it at all. So it's very easy to read a news article about it and think that you know what's going on when really we don't have much of an idea about what's going on. So thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
I'd
Doug.
like to, can I just add a little bit to that piece? And I don't want to speak specifically to that application because I did that at Planning Commission, and that application is deferred. And so it'll come back to the commission and then to the board. But I guess just generally speaking, I'd like to say, and this is the case with that application, that sometimes there's new information that we get the day of or the night of a planning commission meeting. And in this case, that happened, and it was an important piece, and it often is. And so when that happens, and particularly when staff, are asked to evaluate that information and then sort of, put that in staff's report for the commission to react to, it makes it hard when you hear something brand new right in the middle of a meeting, or oftentimes we'll get it the day of. And then staff are put in this position where they're asked, to respond to that, and they really haven't had the materials in front of them, and all the little fine details to react to it. And so that is what happened in this case. And that happens with other applications. It's not unique to this application that was for that particular property. And as Doug pointed out, it is complex. There's all these other issues that, we're asked to consider and weigh in on, and different applications have a different amount of information available so staff can assess all those. So in some cases, regardless of getting information kind of at the last minute, sometimes there's unknowns and things that staff really weren't fully able to assess, and so then the applicant really has to decide, do they want to defer and come back, or do they want to go through planning commission and go to the board? Sometimes if there's too much that we didn't get to react to at planning commission level, the board may choose to send it back to us. So that's really something the applicant has to decide in situations where that happens, where new information is presented or there's still some unknowns that staff really wasn't able to fully assess. So that's,
yeah,
that's
I guess to some degree, the policy, it kind of answers my question, whether departments are communicating behind the scenes, whether there is any interaction between in the entire process when they're planning these things. Do they come to, for instance, social services and say, how does this affect your department, or what would this positively impact for your customers, or or if that was something that was considered taboo and they don't want that to happen for various reasons. But when Doug explains that they're working on a policy and that it's necessary to have it hammered out ahead of time and have it really clear. And then that way you can't be accused of doing anything wrong or impropriety or trying to sway it in a certain direction. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. So, I am hoping that selfishly, as someone who has served on this board and has heard this discussion about affordable housing and about the needs of our residents, I hope that it makes it a lot easier, or that it pushes things forward in a way where we can make some positive change, because it just sometimes seems like we talk about certain priorities, but then they just don't seem to happen. So I think that it sounds like we're doing all the things that we should be doing, and we'll see how it affects, what happens in the future.
I really want to kind of add just a little bit of additional context. The Premier Circle application that was recently approved by the board. I don't know if you saw that or not.
That's the hotel.
Yes, the redevelopment of the hotel property over there.
Yeah, and that's our presentation for today.
Okay, never mind. Okay, okay, very good.
Yep. Oh, you didn't know you're going to give the presentation, Doug? That's you.
Yep, our guest speaker is here. But I wanted to offer, would you like for me to resend the presentation that Stacy and Philip gave back in September? Because her slides tell you some of the things that are in the proposed policy. Would you like that? Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, before we I introduce our speaker, are there any other questions or comments about the informational items that I can address? All right, well then, should we move on, Jenny?
Yes, let's
Okay.
move on. Did you want to introduce Anthony and then we
Yeah.
can go through and introduce ourselves?
Yep. Anthony, welcome. Are you able to put yourself on video, or is that not
Hello,
possible?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I don't have that option, but I would be happy to if that was made available. I think I'm still like an attendee mode or something like that.
So Lisa, can you ask him to start his video? You go to the top right of his frame, and where the little dots are, click on that, and it'll you'll see a command that says ask to start video. So what do you get, Anthony, when you try to turn it on?
Well, there's not an option for it. I just have an option to like raise my hand or for Q&A or chat. That's it.
So did you use the link that Lisa sent out for the panelists?
Let me see. I did use the one that Lisa sent me, yeah.
Well, that's mystifying.
Is there an
There should
option
be a way to
for
make me a
Lisa?
presenter, I think.
Could you make him a co-host?
Lisa, can you make me a co-host?
I already did. Where am I?
Bear with us, folks.
It looks like Diantha might not be able to use her video either. Oh, there's
Okay.
Anthony.
I think
Oh,
I'm
there
in.
you are. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Good. Phew.
Phyllis, you may not recognize me. I have recently shaved. I had a.
Yeah. Yes,
don't
I
recognize myself when I keep looking at myself on a Zoom. So, yes.
Right. Well, welcome, Anthony. Anthony is our executive director of the Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless. And if you have been, as Doug mentioned, if you've been reading in the paper, the coalition, affectionately known as TJAC, has been partnering with Piedmont Housing Alliance to work on this project at Premier Circle. So I wanted Anthony to come and talk with us today about what TJAC is doing, not simply on that project, but just, you know, you heard from Stacy and Philip around different housing programs for the county, but, you know, I think the coalition as a separate nonprofit is also doing some a lot of work in terms of affordable housing and particular services for the homeless. And that's really been true throughout the pandemic as we had to go from a congregate care setting to using hoteling. So I will turn it over to Anthony in a minute, but I would like for you all to introduce yourselves. And what I can do is I'll just go by the frame here. And if you could indicate to Anthony what magisterial district you represent, that would be fabulous. And so Lisa Jordan is our DSS administrative coordinator who kind of keeps us all together. So Catherine.
Oh, I'm Catherine Bergman from the Sammy Miller District. Liz Palmer is my supervisor. I'm not running again, but she is still.
Karen. And you're on mute, Karen.
Karen Harridge from the Jack Jewett District, Diantha.
And Jenny.
I'm Jenny Moore. I represent the Whitehall District, and Ann Malik is the supervisor for that district.
And Mary?
I'm Mary McIntyre from the Rio District, and Ned Galloway is my supervisor.
And Amy?
Loffer, and B. Lepisto is my supervisor. It's Ravenna District.
And Supervisor McKeel?
Just joining you today. Thank you for letting me share and listen.
Thanks. And Doug?
Hey, Anthony, Doug Walker in the County Executive's Office.
All right,
Thank you all. Thank you.
Anthony, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis, for the invite to come to speak to you all about the work that we've been doing and we're doing, and the exciting project that's coming up as well. So, just to begin, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with TJAC and the work that we do. It has changed quite a bit in the pandemic, but before the pandemic, TJAC has been what we call a continuum of care lead agency, which basically means that we are designated by HUD to lead collaborative efforts that aim to end homelessness in our communities locally, essentially. So we don't provide direct services, but we work to empower direct service providers in the community like the Haven, Pacham, Region 10, Families in Crisis, On Our Own, etc. So all the organizations that do direct services, we work to try to empower them and set in place coordination efforts so that they can work together effectively. And we also fund agencies directly for homeless services work in the community. So I have a little presentation I'll share with you about our system of care and how it works broadly in an ideal setting. And that should give you an idea of the different types of opportunities we have in the homeless system of care, what our approach is to our work, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we've got going on moving forward as well with the new permanent supportive housing development that's underway. So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Okay, do you see my screen that says TJAC Homeless Service System?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is an overview of how our system of care works, and just wanted to walk through it. And please stop me if you have questions or want to clarify anything. Please feel free to do so. Okay. So the three parts that you see across the top are the three kind of main portions of our system, or the three main kind of steps, if you will, of how we do our work. There's the entry to the system, is basically how we come to know somebody who's experiencing homelessness or who needs help with housing because of fear of falling into homelessness. Then there's the assessment process of how we get to know somebody, what their strengths are, what their challenges or barriers are. And then we prioritization and referral process is basically how we work to connect people with appropriate services in the community for either shelter or housing, and make those connections. So the first part, there's kind of three main portions or three main areas of connection of how we kind of come to know people. And that's through street outreach, which is essentially where people kind of go out to identify and focus primarily on people who live not in emergency shelters, who live outside under bridges, in their cars, etc. And in our community, we have the PATH team, which is at Region 10. And PATH is dedicated to work and focus on people who live outside, who are dealing with serious mental illness. And they can, get them involved in services at Region 10. But that's the focus group, is people living outside in that group. So we actually, have 2 staff members for our community that's their goal. Obviously, during the pandemic, that was a little bit tricky for a while, but I believe they are back to being able to work, face to face in this capacity with people experiencing homelessness. And that's important to do outreach, because not everybody who is in need of assistance reaches out for assistance, right? I'm sure all of you kind of understand that in your own worlds. And oftentimes the people who need assistance the most are the people who don't reach out for assistance. And that's why, outreach, especially in homeless services, is really necessary. So that's an important piece to the puzzle. The next part is, people who are interested in services. There's two options, basically, to walk in person to the Haven, and that's at 112 West Market Street. Essentially, people can just show up there and say, hey, I'm interested, I need help with either I'm about to become homeless or I am homeless, I need help with shelter. So that in person is an option, as well as calling over the phone. Now, this is something that's new since the pandemic, but we used to partner with the city of Charlottesville's Human Services Department. They had a community resource line, some of you may be familiar with. But when the pandemic hit, that line really needed to be used primarily for COVID relief funding. And so that's what that was dedicated to. And the Haven basically set up its own phone line just for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So you either can go in person to the Haven or you can call over the phone. And those are basically the opportunities to get in touch with folks or to reach out. So either through outreach or people can contact us. And the important part about streamlining it is so that it's as fair and consistent as possible. One of the strategies that we use, which this is based upon, is called the coordinated entry system. And again, it's one of the tenets of that is fair and consistent access. And so I guess we could say theoretically, many years ago, before that was a requirement, or before it was even a best practice, there was basically side doors to getting access, right? Depending on people maybe you knew or that had relationships with, you might be able to get into shelter, or you might be able to get into a housing program. And it wasn't really consistent or coordinated about how those decisions were made or about how people reached out for assistance. And so that's what's so important about having these kind of consistent and streamlined as much as possible for how to reach out. So once that happens, and this is true across all the different three options for how people reach out for assistance, is called homelessness diversion. And diversion is essentially at its core just a problem-solving conversation about what's happening and how we can empower folks to end their homelessness. It's pretty straightforward. It's probably what you think it is when you think about that. But when people reach out for assistance, what we need to do, because we don't have assistance or we don't have resources available to help everybody who's experiencing financial troubles, we need to be able to understand who are the folks that, if not for assistance, would absolutely become homeless or would go to the streets. And so that's what that conversation is about. So try to understand if there are other resources, if that's friends or family, if there's other income resources that someone can use to prevent their homelessness, empower them to end their own homelessness, is what we try to do in each case, no matter what, even if people are reaching out to through outreach who live outside, there's still opportunities for diversion by talking about friends and family. That might be an option, etc. So that's always an important part of our process. Whoops. Let me move that back. Sorry, I had a whole cool system of only showing this briefly, but it's fine. So another point is for people that it's determined that homelessness prevention can help. So if they're like facing eviction or facing homelessness, the Haven has a homelessness prevention program. And so that's why it's kind of shown here near the bottom with the phone line, because most people who are in that position reach out by calling the phone number and say, hey, I'm in this situation, and is there anything you can do to help? And so homelessness prevention is a tricky program, only because the eligibility is pretty tight, and it's not an eviction prevention program, which is important to distinguish. It's a homelessness prevention program. And so really it's dedicated for people who have no other option, who would literally enter a shelter if not for assistance. So we use 2 weeks of assistance, essentially. Or sorry, if they're within 2 weeks of becoming homeless, that's the kind of criteria that we try to use for using homelessness prevention to step in and try to prevent that case. So if diversion fails and if homelessness prevention is not appropriate for that client, that basically means that we need to talk about immediate housing needs, shelter needs for that client. And so that's the next part. That's why if diversion is not successful, we talk about shelter options. And shelter options are, can kind of be considered like interim housing on the path to permanent housing. And we have, emergency shelter in our community, and we have transitional housing as well as options for interim housing. So emergency shelter, many of you are probably familiar with. We have, Salvation Army, we have Pachem, and we have Families in Crisis as well that does hotel and motel assistance. Salvation Army is what we would consider, or I guess I'll frame it this way. Pachem is an overnight shelter that traditionally was just in churches, during the cold weather months. And it was a low barrier shelter, which means that they were open to working with people who, had maybe substance use issues or other types of issues that may have precluded them from getting service at Salvation Army, for instance. For instance, at Salvation Army, you can't be actively using. And so we have a low barrier option at Pachem. And then if people don't have those issues, Salvation Army is the preferred option that we try to help people access. And Families in Crisis is dedicated to families with children. We don't have a family shelter, as it were. Salvation Army does have a few rooms for families with children, but it's quite limited. So we use hotel vouchers to help families in that situation. Obviously, emergency shelter has changed significantly in the pandemic. And ever since April of last year, almost a full year, and we've been sheltering people with health conditions that put them at high risk for serious illness due to COVID in local hotels. And Pachem, who traditionally was just doing shelter in the winter months, again at churches, was able to step up and actually staff that shelter program in hotels, and has been doing so since April. They've been providing case management and just kind of general oversight of that program for folks with health conditions who are living in hotels. We started out with just 30 rooms in the beginning of the pandemic for people with health conditions that put them at high risk. And then as we saw the need increase, we moved to 60 rooms, and now we're at about 80 people. We have basically the whole hotel at La Quinta Suites on 29. Big shout out to La Quinta Suites for working with us for almost a full year at this point. And then we are working with some other hotels as well on smaller contracts that we've needed to expand to meet the need. So obviously shelter has changed a lot because we stopped doing congregate shelter as quickly as we could, and only made congregate shelter options available for people who didn't have severe health issues or severe health conditions. So that's the kind of the situation we're right now. So really grateful that we've had support to be able to do that. And then transitional housing, is pretty small in our community, but we do have the Maca Hope House, which is transitional housing in our community, and that's for families with children. So once we identify shelter options for folks, the next piece is we talk about prioritization and referral for housing services. And so the way we do this is, through a community case review, it's called. So different providers in the homeless system of care meet to talk about clients and to discuss who would be the best fit and who's in most need for housing assistance because of their length of their homelessness or because of their health conditions. We prioritize based on vulnerability, essentially, many of our housing resources. And these acronyms stand in place for the different types of housing programs we have, but there's two main housing programs that we have that are available in the homeless system of care. Rapid Rehousing, it's called, and Permanent Supportive Housing. So Rapid Rehousing is a program that provides these different assistance options for folks. So help in finding places, rental assistance for up to 24 months, security deposits, utility deposits, and case management. And the way we are prioritizing this program right now is through two main groups. And one is the more traditional, which is the most vulnerable folks with the most barriers to getting into housing. People have been homeless the longest, which we've kept, but we've also opened up prioritization for people with fewer barriers, because traditionally all of our assistance was focused on the most vulnerable, which needs to happen, but it basically left people who needed relatively fewer resources to end their homelessness, oftentimes without that assistance. And so we've wanted to open that up for folks. And so that's something we've been excited about. We've started doing that since the pandemic, frankly, to help people get out of shelters and get out of the hotel programs and into housing. And it's, it's been, there are clues that it's really successful. During the pandemic, I have to say our housing programs have had a really tough time finding units. It's been very tough for a number of interesting reasons, and this is kind of so fresh that we're still digesting what's happening. But one of the interesting effects that we realized of the eviction moratoriums, or moratoria, I guess I should say, is that the vacancy rate's very low. And so what we realized was, prior to the pandemic, the homeless system of care relied, frankly, on people getting evicted from units so that we could move people into those units. And that's not a good thing for us to rely upon, but since those evictions have essentially stopped, vacant units for folks to move into have been very scarce. And so that's been just a really interesting learning, for us. It highlights the need for more affordable housing, which I know everyone is aware of, but I thought that was an interesting piece of the puzzle that we have learned since the pandemic. It's been really difficult for us to find available units for folks. And then permanent supportive housing is being provided by Region 10 and Virginia Supportive Virginia Supportive Housing. They operate the crossings in downtown Charlottesville. And they provide housing search assistance if it's the type of program where someone can rent an existing apartment in the community, and basically indefinite rental assistance. And it's dedicated for people who are considered chronically homeless, which are folks who have the longest histories of homelessness and with disabling conditions. And oftentimes these are the folks that are most visible portion of homelessness, visible part of homelessness. People that you see oftentimes in parks or living outside are oftentimes chronically homeless. And so that's what this program is dedicated to, serving those folks. And also the intensive case management is also really important. So a lot of support services dedicated to this kind of program. So those are the different housing programs that we have, that we focus on to help people get out of homelessness. And again, it's kind of split between a more flexible program with rental assistance up to 24 months, and then a more intensive program for people with most vulnerabilities who are chronically homeless. And with all of the intent moving towards housing as quickly as possible, basically our system can be described as what we call housing first, which doesn't necessarily mean we have housing available immediately, but it does mean that we are focused on housing as the solution to homelessness. And so we try to get there as quickly as possible. And that's also why we try to prevent entries to shelter as much as possible through diversion or through prevention, because once you become homeless, and it's tough already to get back into housing. But the other interesting thing about homelessness is it's been described as similar to a black hole, cosmologically, meaning that the longer you spend homeless, or the closer you are to the center of the black hole, the harder it is to get out. And that's, I think, really true for homelessness, is that we see that folks with the longest histories of homelessness usually have the most barriers to getting back out into housing. And so we try to prevent that as much as we can by trying to get people back into housing quickly so that people don't become chronically homeless in the future. And so that's just a quick overview of kind of how our system works in a nutshell, and then the types of resources that we have, like shelter and housing resources that we bring into bear to try to get to housing. So any quick questions so far on just the overview? Okay. So, this little flow chart looks good in theory, right? Good in practice. But I want to talk a little bit about why, what prevents this from working out for most people. And at the end of the day, the biggest barrier is the goal, is housing, is finding available units that people can qualify for. One of the things that we've realized, again, over the past year is not only that it's difficult to find units, available units, but it's been difficult to find units that people qualify for because of the history of their eviction history, rental history, criminal history, and credit score. I mean, some of the affordable units in the community are requiring 650 credit score to be able to get into, which is quite challenging for a lot of people to make. And so we've seen the barriers to getting into affordable housing continue to rise, which is already tough to find affordable housing. It becomes even greater of a challenge when you're working with many people experiencing homelessness because of those barriers, those additional barriers. And I'm sure that you've seen something similar with landlords being willing to work with the Housing Choice Voucher program too. It's probably very similar barriers that our programs face as well of working with landlords. Getting over that perceived risk of working with working with clients who've been homeless or working with clients who are supported by one of these programs. And so because of that, so that's one thing, is just availability of housing, right, is a big barrier. Another big barrier that we come across is the, which is related to housing, but it's working with chronically homeless folks. And the reason it's a barrier is because it's a resource that's quite rare, I guess you could say, but it's such a potent and important resource in homeless services that we need more of it to improve how our system flows. And so as a quick example of that, and I hope it's not too technical, but on a given night in our community, we have, to the best of our knowledge, about 50 or so, 51 or 2, I think was the latest count, people experiencing chronic homelessness in our area. And in our area, what I mean is the, Charlottesville, Albemarle metropolitan area. And that's folks who have been homeless for at least a year with a disabling condition. And we don't have 50 places or 50 available program enrollments for permanent supportive housing to serve that population adequately. And so as a result, what ends up happening is that those folks spend longer in shelters, taking up shelter beds for more amount of time. And they also take up other housing assistance too. For instance, this rapid rehousing program, which can help people with security deposits and rent, ends up basically paying for a full year of rental assistance just for one person, because there's no other options for folks who are chronically homeless to be able to house themselves. They need an indefinite subsidy, essentially, because many are just either have no income or have Social Security income. And so essentially what I'm trying to say is that they need a lot of resources, and so they take up other resources that could be used for folks who are not chronically homeless. And so focusing on chronic homelessness is a best practice, not only because it's the most vulnerable people in our community who are at the highest risk of dying on the streets or getting more complicated health conditions, but because it also helps free up other resources to better end homelessness in general. So that's why we focus on chronic homelessness in particular. And that brings me to the latest project. That's why we've been focusing quite a lot on trying to get more permanent supportive housing resources in our community, is to focus on that in particular. So we've been, working to try to replicate the crossings in downtown Charlottesville. When the pandemic hit and we started sheltering people in hotels, it was quite costly, and we weren't quite sure in the beginning of the pandemic how long we would need to do this. And it became clear, over the next few months, after the pandemic hit, that we would probably need to be doing this for quite a long time. And so we started looking at options with some of our partners in the development realm about any hotels that could be for sale, frankly, so that we could use the hotel structure for shelter and then eventually create apartments that would provide a permanent end to homelessness. Both shelter and housing all in one. And essentially we were able to find that the Red Carpet Inn was for sale. And so we were able to bring together PHA, Be My Housing Alliance, Virginia Supportive Housing, who's developed the crossings in downtown Charlottesville, and the Charlottesville Community Foundation to partner together to figure out how we could purchase it and develop it for permanent supportive housing in the future, and also affordable housing units. And in the interim time frame, we'll be using those hotel rooms as emergency shelter. So it's a pretty unique project, and one that I'm certainly excited about, especially because it not only offers immediate relief of needing kind of private rooms during this pandemic for shelter, but it also offers opportunities for people to, end their homelessness through permanent housing, as well as providing affordable units for the general community as well. And so, to my knowledge, it's closing tomorrow, which is pretty amazing. Also, quite a lot on my plate as we get closer to that. And we're hoping to open up shelter operations there, in April, probably towards the end of April, to begin providing shelter there for folks. So, and that kind of project is important, not only because it's, what it does is it provides a dedicated project to focus on chronic homelessness with support services on site, which I think is really key in this case. There are great models for permanent supportive housing across the spectrum. Region 10 has a model which is called scattered site, which means that they just use apartments that are in the community, and they rent those to folks experiencing chronic homelessness, and case management kind of comes to the client as needed. And there's also what's called kind of project-based, which is similar to the crossings, where people live on site and there's supportive services on site. And both are important to have in a community because to allow for client choice. Some people prefer just living in the community, and some people prefer living in a more service-rich environment where there's people on site that can kind of assist with daily needs or connection to other community resources like employment, mental health, that type of thing. So, this development at this site at the Red Carpet Inn will have that on-site support services, which I think is really key to this piece. So yeah, we're excited about it, and have had a lot of great support from Albemarle County for the rezoning for this, and we look forward to being able to have those apartments, not only because we need more units of affordable housing, but also because we help people get off the streets and into those units too. So yeah, that's the overview of what we're working on right now with the Red Carpet Inn project and what I think it will provide for the community. And that's the kind of thing that we need to kind of keep focusing on too, I believe, is not only opportunities to bring in landlords to work with existing housing programs, but also create opportunities for new housing, because both are really needed.
Can I ask how many units that'll be then? How many?
At the new development. So right, so there's going to be two developers, Virginia Supportive Housing, who developed the crossings in downtown Charlottesville. They're developing 80 units of permanent supportive housing, and then Piedmont Housing Alliance is developing at least 60 additional units. I'm not sure if that number has changed quite yet. So I believe it's going to be about 140 altogether units. And those 60 that PHA are just going to be, affordable rentals without like a specific target population, just kind of income based.
And Anthony, our Housing Choice Voucher program has committed a certain number of project-based vouchers. Do you know right off the top of your head how many we've committed for that? I'm blanking.
I think it was 12, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds
but
right.
I'm not quite sure. And there's which is also huge. That's particularly important because chronically homeless folks oftentimes don't have income to begin with. And we work, part of their support services are to work with those folks to try to get income in place through disability income, but really need that subsidy to help those folks live in those units. So that support from the Office of Housing from the county is crucial to make that work. It's also crucial because it allows Virginia Supportive Housing to apply for low-income housing tax credits for the development of the structure. And having that commitment of vouchers is a required piece to get bonus points. So it's a huge part of the application.
Are you at the point where you want to open it up for questions, or do you have more slides?
Yeah. No, that's it for our slides. So would be happy
Okay.
to open it up.
All right.
Well, I had a
floor-
question. I was wondering for the, I guess maybe it's more than just the people that are in the hotel rooms, that obviously that's, you know, different because of COVID. There's more people, and it sounds like there are also other programs that were maybe more seasonal that have been year round. So I wondered if you know if some of those can continue, or I guess I just wonder what happens to folks that have, you know, gotten a place, a temporary place, if they'll be able to continue to stay in those places as they work through some of this, or, I mean, or is that just going to stop at some point? Maybe you don't know, but whatever you know about that would be helpful. And then I wondered too, if maybe you're talking about April, people could be, at least in the temporary part for the Red Carpet Inn, if that would be a place where people could go that, you know, have something temporary in a hotel room that maybe wouldn't otherwise have that, and they have that because of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. That's a great question. So we've, you know, from the folks that we've been supporting through the homeless system of care, I think, you know, other programs have been supporting people in hotels too, here and there. But for the folks that have been supported through our system of care, we've, you know, I've really been focusing as much as I can on maintaining that shelter for them until the Red Carpet Inn is open as a shelter. And I believe, and so we will be able to do that for the folks that we have in hotels. You know, at La Quinta Suites, will be able to just move in, and there won't be a break in shelter for those folks. And so I'm really happy that we've been able to work that out. So I think that's what your question was about, was, you know,
Yeah.
whether or not people who are currently in hotels will have an option of moving into this new hotel up. And then, yes, that's the intent once that opens in later April.
So Anthony, are all these 140 units that you're speaking about, are they already spoken for, or will there be availability for others?
Great question. They're not spoken for, no. You know, as I understand the program, at least for the permanent supportive housing program, they will be, you know, some of those units are dedicated to people who are chronically homeless. So that will be like an eligibility requirement to get into those units. But because the Virginia Supportive Housing, Permanent Supportive Housing project that I'm talking about isn't going to be finished, you know, I mean, we're expecting hopefully people will be able to move in 2024 to that project. So it's going to be a couple years. At that point, we'll take a look at who's homeless, who's chronically homeless at that point, because in 2 years, it could be many new people, or it could be maybe a lot of the same people, but usually the population changes. And so we want to be able to make sure that people who need that resource at that time get access to it. And instead of making commitments now, because we want to try to work with everybody who's homeless now, get them into housing as much as we can, because we know that people are going to become homeless later on. So it's not spoken for in terms of particular individuals, but it is you know, dedicated to people who are chronically homeless or who will be chronically homeless at that time when the development finishes. As for the general affordable housing through PHA, I think it's similar. You know, once it's ready to open, I'm sure they'll open up application process and have people apply. And so it's not spoken for before it's developed, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So the other question I had, the people on TV yesterday were talking about they would have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
When you all began with this project. So what's in place for those folks?
So the CBS news story is what you're referring to, I'm pretty sure, was, basically was very inaccurate, I'll say. Anyways, I won't get into a lot of the detail,
Yeah,
but
they usually are.
we were, notified of some of the longer term stayers at the Red Carpet Inn. And I've been working with those folks to, make sure that they're aware of what was happening. And if they needed help to transition, because everybody at the Red Carpet Inn, has been paying to stay there. So there are income, there's resources for them to continue paying, but we will, we are actually helping some of those folks who have been long-term stayers transition to another hotel for a month, so that they have, so they're not going to the streets. I mean, that was, certainly our biggest intent was that this project, obviously for the intent of the project, we weren't wanting to displace anybody to the streets. And so for those kind of longer term stayers, we are working with them for a transitional time frame for another hotel. We're supporting a number of folks. So, so anyways, that article or that news story was pretty inaccurate in that regard. So.
Are there other questions that people have?
I have a few. You were talking about it in terms of units, but how many people are you thinking each unit is actually going to hold?
Good question. So for permanent supportive housing, they're really dedicated, they're focused for individuals. The plan is for like 1-bedroom units, essentially. For the Piedmont Housing Alliance development, I think they're still working on how many multifamily units they'll have on the site versus how many kind of 1-bedroom units they'll have on the site. So I can't really speak to that, but I do know that it's on the table, at least to in terms of what kind of household sizes will be accommodated. But for the permanent supportive housing in general, it's really dedicated for individuals.
Okay, and they're fully furnished units, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
Fully furnished units. Yep.
And does the site have also any office space, administrative space kind of set aside? Because knowing that we're housing people who have needs for services, and there are a bunch of different agencies or a bunch of different services that are going to be involved in their lives, who may find it really convenient to be on location to actually serve people and see people and do outreach. So is there some sort of way, for instance, for Region 10 to come and have a place that they can use in that area? Or are these individuals still expected to get those services out in the places they've been getting them before?
That's a great question, Mary. And the model that Virginia Supportive Housing uses is that there is on-site office space, not only for their own case managers, but for other case managers in the community that want to come on site and work with their clients. There's community rooms as well that are options, but they do have office space set aside for that too, because that's oftentimes the best practice is to just go to where your client is most comfortable and to their home. So that's definitely included.
Okay.
Anthony, could you mention how many case managers are at the crossings, for example?
Sure. So the crossings is 60 units, and I believe there's 2. So about 30-person caseloads essentially, and I think that's that similar caseload is the plan for these. This is a larger development. It's 80 units. So I'm not sure how many case managers they're planning, but I would assume it's kind of a similar caseload size that they're working within. And I think what's interesting is, the way that they usually make the permanent supportive housing work is that they try to get half of the units with project-based vouchers, so that people who are chronically homeless can live in those units. And then the rest of the units, the other 40, would be also just available for affordable housing for individuals to move into, who weren't necessarily homeless. They would just be available to the community. But those support services are still accessible by everybody, which is, I think, really key. And I think what's to me, which speaks to the power of supportive housing, I'm a big fan of supportive housing, if you couldn't tell, but is that, they found that supportive services are accessed kind of equally by both populations. And so, one might think that it might be more kind of leaning more heavily towards people who were formerly homeless, but they found that it's basically equal across both kind of groups of people that live at their properties. So, those supportive services, I think, are just needed in general, more in housing, frankly, and especially as a lot of the folks that are served in the homeless system of care are elderly, and need that kind of support services. So having that on site, I think, is really key. And I think they've seen that it's really beneficial, again, not only for their homeless clients, but for their residents in general.
And then what was the timeline? When is the goal to have it all completed and up and running?
So for the next 1.5 to 2 years, we'll be doing emergency shelter using the existing hotel structure. Once the development begins, which is slated for 2023, for the permanent supportive housing, that'll reduce kind of the number of rooms that we have access to for shelter, but they hope to, I think, can't speak exactly as an estimate, but they're hoping to move people in, in 2024 for the permanent supportive housing. That's the first phase. Then once that's finished, the second phase is going to be Piedmont Housing Alliance's affordable housing units, the 60 additional ones. And I think that's another, so that's 2025 basically is the goal there. And then finally, there's another development on the property as well, which is a commercial property that's right up on 29. And so that's basically the last portion, which isn't residential, but it's still an important part of the project. And so that'll finish it out after PHA finishes their development.
Anthony, can you stop your screen sharing so I can see the whole frame?
No problem.
Thanks.
Is that better? Sorry about
Great,
that.
that's better. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions?
I'm just wondering, how long do you anticipate people to stay with you? What is kind of your anticipation?
So, over the past year, it's been, again, really new. The pandemic, we've had to shift significantly to what we do, especially with shelter. So we're serving people for a lot longer than we usually do. The average time people spent in shelters pre-pandemic was about 30 days. And again, that was average, meaning that there are some folks who spend maybe the whole season in shelter, right? But most people, the median number was about 2 weeks. So most people really only use shelter, for a relatively small amount of time. There are a handful of folks, relatively few, but who do stay, longer and longer, right? And usually those are the kind of folks who are chronically homeless, have more barriers to get into housing. Most people who fall into homelessness, it's their first time and they don't stay very long, which is a good thing. We want to help people get back into the community quickly. So I always think that's an interesting kind of data point to share, is that, that's what we find is about 70% of people, this was again pre-pandemic, it was their first time experiencing homelessness and they stay relatively short amounts of time in our system of care. That other 30% were longer term stayers and usually have more barriers and getting into housing. Since the pandemic, that number I think has jumped up to almost 100 and some days. So it's a lot of people have stayed with us quite a long time, because it's been hard for people to find units in the community during the pandemic. It's been hard to talk with landlords, to negotiate kind of in-person discussions because of because of COVID, and also hotel rooms are also, it's the most stable place many people have had for so long, maybe ever, frankly. And so this has been therapeutic for so many people, and we're happy to be able to have provided that opportunity for people to just decompress for a little while, honestly. That being said, it's not permanent for them. It's not their home, and we want to try to help people, encourage people to find a home, even though it's been difficult. So it's been a much longer amount of time we've been working with folks, frankly. Some people have stayed with us since April, in the hotel rooms. In the development, Virginia Supportive Housing finds that on average, most people stay in permanent supportive housing, I believe, for like 3 years, 3 to 4 years. And then move on to, either their own place that doesn't, because they've got income or because they don't need supportive services in the same way, or they just want to move to a different place, or they sometimes are reconnected with family, frankly. A lot of people who were on the streets for many years, once they have stability of housing, are able to make those connections again. And so, yeah, that's, but then the kind of the average, as far as I understand it, for people that live in permanent supportive housing. And some people obviously will stay much longer, and some people will stay for short amounts of time, but that's been the average, is about, yeah. So hopefully that helps.
I thought of another one, sorry. Sometimes that happens.
No problem, no, please.
So if Pacham is considered a low barrier shelter, or an example of something like that, and the Salvation Army is kind of like a high barrier shelter, what barrier level is this kind of thing?
The Red Carpet Inn Shelter Project, you mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, would people describe this as something that is hard for people to get into, or are we trying to make it, as easy as possible? Like, how would you describe it?
That's a good question. I mean, I would describe it as low barrier. So Pacham is staffing, they will be staffing and operating the shelter at the Red Carpet Inn. And, they've been operating shelter in churches since, I want to say 2004, maybe. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but quite a long time. And so they're quite familiar with that, with shelter operations and providing low barrier shelter. And low barrier really means that there's just as few barriers as possible. And so the traditional barriers to shelter a lot of times were substance use. And so those are not barriers to getting, to staying, and won't be barriers to staying in this new shelter. Obviously there are expectations and also hard lines about violence, right, are just not, are not okay, and people won't be able to continue staying there if they are violent towards other guests or violent towards staff. Those types of things that are pretty hard lines are, of course, are still there. But they do their best to work with folks, and they understand that people are in a high stress environment. And so the low barrier is just an understanding that if people are asked to leave here, there's not really any other place for people to go. And they really understand that. And it's not it's not a light decision for them to make. And so it's just that, the traditional barriers that have been put up aren't there in the same way, but obviously there are still some things that are not, appropriate, obviously. So we have to make sure it's a safe place for people, for other guests, and so that's certainly a priority. Does that help answer that a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And then for the the apartments, permanent supportive housing, really it's just as long as you can keep the tenants of a lease, that's the barrier. So if you use or drink or whatever, it's not a problem. We just want you to do it in your own apartment and not on the streets, because it's better for everybody involved. So it's kind of a similar approach there. If you can keep the tenants of the lease, then there's no problem there. And Diantha, I saw that you wanted to ask something. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I appreciate all the questions. They're really good. I have two, but first I want to just say thank you for this project, because it really is a great project. And we all wish it lots of success. I do have a couple questions, and I probably should know this, Anthony. Talk to me a minute about, I tend to always come back to schools and education. Talk to me a little bit about, I know we have a number of homeless children in Albemarle County Public Schools. I can't speak for the city. I know Albemarle, right? But so help me a little bit with how this project might work with the school system or help children. I'm assuming it's not adult only. And if you talked about that and I missed it, I am really sorry. I apologize.
No worries, Diantha. It's a great question. And so the shelter project won't be, it is for adults only. It is just not going to be an appropriate place for children to live. And so we will be continuing to do our hotel, sheltering vouchers for families with children. and this site just won't, we just feel like won't be appropriate for families with children. The apartments, permanent supportive housing, you know, that is dedicated for individuals, chronically homeless individuals. But the affordable housing units through PHA, you know, they are looking at, and again, I'm not sure, I can't speak to how many units they're hoping to include, which are multifamily, but, or that which are for households with children, or, you know, more bedroom units basically, but I know that's on the plan. So, you know, having more units obviously addresses that, but it doesn't directly address like family homelessness. This project, you know, doesn't in the same way that, not in the same way that addresses adult, you know, individual homelessness. And, you know, that is a really interesting thing, and maybe it's another subject for another talk, because it's a whole very important subject to talk about. But, you know, we find relatively few families that fall into literal homelessness, meaning in their car, or, you know, need to be put up in a hotel, compared to individuals or couples, you know, adult couples. That doesn't mean that there aren't many, and there are many. And you know the data, Diantha, about numbers of families and children. I'm sorry, numbers of children and families who are living in hotels or living doubled up with their friends and family. You know, which I would consider homeless as well, but they are not eligible for many of the programs that we provide, frankly, because they are, you know, paying for their own housing through a hotel or living with friends and family on a more permanent basis. So that's that's another issue, I think, in particular, which really just speaks to the need for more affordable units or more opportunities for families with children to find units or pay for units or get support services to, you know, to stay in their units.
And to be perfectly honest with you, for children, many of these children are in situations where they're seeing things that they should not be seeing at their age.
Absolutely.
And it really is not appropriate, and it's not helpful for our children. Another quick question, then I'm going to have to go because I have another Zoom at 5. But will you help me? One of the things that I have probably I hear have questions about as much as any topic since I've been in the 8 years that I've been a supervisor. Probably because I do represent a portion of the urban ring and some of the borders with Charlottesville, but help me with how I should answer, because I'm already getting these questions because people are hearing about this project. They are wanting to know if this is going to take care of the folks that they see standing on the corners at our intersections and that are holding up signs that say they're homeless. And so what do I as a supervisor say about how this project might help remedy what they're seeing with, you know, throughout the ring?
It's a great question. So I would say that this project is exactly the type of thing to address that. Because, you know, I'll say that without naming individuals, obviously, like we're supporting in the transition out of the red carpet in a couple people who are those folks that panhandle to pay their stay at a hotel, right? But would otherwise be homeless. And so no one who's panhandling that I've ever met is doing well doing it, and they're right on that verge. And so this project, you know, offers an opportunity for folks to have access to both shelter, but also permanent housing, which is more, I think, you know, the thing that actually ends that. I will say that it is obviously, we can't force people to take housing options. You know, it's by their choice. But having more opportunities for an apartment will directly address that. And so a lot of the folks that have fallen through the cracks previously are a lot of times the folks with the greatest barriers, and that's exactly what you need permanent supportive housing for, is because it's low barrier. It's kind of, it's the thing that addresses that type of homelessness the most directly, because it's also income based, and so they don't need income to access the unit. So that's what I would say. I would say that this is a kind of project that would have both addressed it through either immediate shelter, but also through permanent supportive housing. And, you know, one of the reasons why people in that situation, this is anecdotal, but might be helpful, is that people who don't choose to go to shelters previously may have chosen to do so because, frankly, they were congregate shelter options. And some people do not feel comfortable, for whether it's maybe because of past trauma they've experienced or mental health issues, that they just do not do well in a congregate, you know, sleeping next to 30 other people. And this will be a different program. Everybody has their own room, you know, so I think this really is a unique thing. We've seen that over the past year with the pandemic, that people who have not wanted to come to shelter have shown up and said, you know what, I really would love to have my own room that fits me better. And people that didn't do well in congregate settings have really been able to decompress in a new way because of these hotel rooms. So that in particular, I hope to address some of those folks that we see panhandling in our community, but anyways, hopefully that's helpful.
So, and just another quick comment, and because I do know that at times, because I'm the liaison for the Albemarle County Police, I know that there are people that call the police about the folks that are panhandling or begging, at whatever term you want to use. Are you all working? Are you going to be working with our law enforcement folks and mental health folks to, if there are calls, that they will, you know, I'm just trying to get the.
Yeah, no. That's a great question.
Yeah.
And, you know, are you familiar with the CIT program?
Yeah, absolutely. But you might tell everybody, make sure everybody is.
Sure. It's Crisis Intervention Training. It's run by Tom von Hamert, or at least it was. I think maybe he stepped into a new role.
Yeah, I think, but
it's like a community case review where it incorporates people from, you know, UVA, Martha Jefferson, local police, and homeless. Like Potcham has representatives that show up there to try to troubleshoot folks that are, you know, using a lot of community resources, calling 911 frequently, and oftentimes those issues overlap with homelessness. And so those connections are there. And, you know, I would love to connect outside of that if that's needed as well, to make sure that we're connecting with those folks that are getting calls about. So if there's anyone in particular that you work with or that you think would be useful for me to contact at the police department, I would be happy to do so. But I would say that, you know, a lot of those connections are through CIT. And oftentimes a lot of those folks have been offered assistance, frankly. I can't speak to individual cases, but.
Well, and I'll just leave it and say that might be at some point, maybe a little too soon, but at some point might be good to have you come to the Citizens Advisory Committee for the police and talk.
Yeah, I would love that. That's a great idea.
So we could think about
because I have not done that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that took so much time. Thank you.
Not at all.
Are there other questions that people have? Thanks, Diantha. I don't see anybody.
Well, I hope this was what you were interested in receiving. And again, thanks for the opportunity to speak about what's happening with Red Carpet Inn and also just about our system in general. If you have any other follow-ups, please feel free to let me know. I may not respond as quickly over the next couple of weeks because we are transitioning into Red Carpet Inn. I just want to be upfront about that, but I really would love to get back to you if you do have any follow-ups, or would love to come back and give you an update about how things are going as well, if that would be helpful. So.
Great, thank you so much. I know you will be very busy, but we appreciate your time here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Anthony.
Phyllis, I don't know if did you want to try to share Anthony's PowerPoint with our message out, or do you think it would just, without having him narrate it, it might not be as great, but.
Yeah, I can send you the link. If they manipulate the link, will they be able to see just pretty much?
Yeah, I'll say it's, you can just click the next button to make the thing appear like we saw it. Once you have the full thing open, you can actually click on the circles and it will bring up more information for you as well. So it's somewhat intuitive, at least to work with, but there is like contact information in some places. And so if you do have questions about a particular part of it, you can kind of click on that and it will bring it up. So, but
Yeah,
yeah, please
that's
feel free to
great.
share that with everybody.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
All right, thank you.
That was really good. Did we have other, anything else from members that we wanted to talk about, or we just can finish up and Phyllis will do the amazing job she always does with our message to the board. I think being able to share that PowerPoint, especially as he described it, I know I'll go back to look at it, and I think that'll be great to be able to send that out with our
Yeah.
message out.
I'll definitely send it out.
Great. Does anyone have anything else? No? All right.
Does
so
anybody else want, besides Mary, want the presentation from September that Stacy and Philip did? Okay.
I think, I don't know, Phyllis, if you know what, and you don't have to know this, but what we'll talk about next month. But I really appreciate, I know the work that goes into having the information items that you're getting from all the different departments, and then like bringing us these, we've had the housing stuff back in September, and it's just really nice that I know it's a lot of work to sort of brainstorm and dig up some of these presentations that we've had, but it's nice. I know sometimes we review the similar information from different departments, and we need to do that, but having these type of things brought to us is really helpful and interesting. I appreciate the work that goes into that.
Well, and if anyone has any interest in a certain topic, or please don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. I'm open to suggestions.
Great, thank you. All right, so it looks like we're done for March's meeting. Can't believe it's March.
I know.
All right, well, we'll see everyone in April.
Yeah, I will say this is, when Phyllis kind of mentioned other topics, it may be timely to update the advisory board on the recruitment process at your next meeting for the new director. So just flagging that. I'm glad to do that. So there'll be a lot to share.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Doug.
Yes, thank you.
Consider yourself on the agenda.
Just like that, you're signed up.
Yeah.
I hope I'm available.
See how easy I am?
All right, well, I'll see you all in April, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you all very much.